Hey everybody, today's topic on the Camaro is fuel economy. And in the age of high gas prices, it's a little more sensitive to some than it might have been in the past. And the reason for this episode is I had a question from someone who follows the channel from New Zealand. And he was asking, whether I could tell what the effect of having the cam change was to this engine. And he recognized that fuel in his country right now is $3 a liter, which would be a little over $11 a gallon. And we've been feeling kind of bad here in Michigan, where gas has been going back and forth between about $4 and $5 a gallon over the summer, which is quite a bit, and it can hamper the enjoyment of your car with the amount of expense that is for filling a tank. So in answer to that question, I thought I would go through and do fuel economy. What's my record here for this car? What is the car? Just a reminder. And how does that compare to some standard? His particular question was, could I tell from the old cam to the new cam, did it make a difference? I'm going to have to go a little further because I never drove this car with the original cam. So the question would be, what could you use as a goalpost? And I'm going to use some of the EPA federal government certification values, label numbers, and I'll give some explanation around those and see if that helps. Just for reference, this is a little notebook. Something my dad taught me years ago, and I've always maintained it, is I keep a record of the car. Now, this notebook keeps all the basic maintenance records, every gallon of gas that goes in, every quart of oil, everything that gets added to the car goes in the log. For the sake of the rebuild, when I redid the engine and all the restoration, I've got an additional computer file with an even more extensive log. But the point is, ever since I got this car moving again and got it on the road, everything goes in the book, every gallon of gas. So I'm going to go back since the car hit the road and give you a synopsis, a summary of what I had. Now, first of all, from a reminder perspective, this is a third gen Camaro, 1985, IROC-Z, Z28, 305 tuned port. And that means it came with an automatic 700R4. It has a 342 gear in it, at least according to the RPO labels. There is some, I've seen in looking at old specs, that there seemed to be some discrepancy whether they were 323s or 342s. But near as I can tell, this one's is a 342. I have the Goodrich Comp 2 Z-rated tires. They're good for 168 miles an hour. Now, that'll be significant later on when we talk about mileposts and fuel economy, because typically speed-rated tires have additional layers, additional cord or additional belts in order to sustain the high speed and the high temperatures, and sometimes stiffer sidewalls, and that affects the rolling resistance, and that has a fuel economy impact as well. So it depends on the tire that you're running on the car. And as an automotive engineer, one of the things we always knew when we put a tire on the car was the rolling resistance coefficient. And it was something in the data from the tire companies, and we were always wanted them to engineer a tire for good rolling resistance. In the aftermarket, it's hard to get those numbers, so you really don't know. So there's I'll call it a wild card at the moment. Otherwise, the car is currently, it has been, it's stock the computer, the ECM programming, the prom is stock. The exhaust system is close to stock. All the emission system is hooked up and working normally, air pump, catalyst. So, I mean, this is just like a car from 1985, with the exception that, you know, the cam has a, you know, about 5 degrees more duration and a little bit more lift. And so it's not far from a stock cam. It's a little bit better. But essentially the car should perform similarly. So you've seen the logbook. I got all my fuel. I'm going to show you data. I have all the data. The first tank full or so I deleted or didn't report here because there was a lot of time where I was just parked in the garage setting timing, doing adjustments. I had to go through the cam break-in for 20 minutes. So I wanted to make sure it was, you know, that first tank of gas was like, well, I don't know. It was like 8 miles to the gallon. It was really bad because I didn't run very many miles and I used a lot of gas, and most of the time the car was sitting still. I was getting, you know, I was getting it shaken down. And then also remember in my data that, you know, the first, whatever, numbers of tanks of gas, I was still breaking in the engine. At this point, I'm more than 5,000 miles into it. But even then, it's probably just now getting what you would call fully broken in. I guess I'll say is that, you know, again, I'm going to go through some EPA numbers and I'll mention a few things about them. And there's a lot of complexity in that as to how you get to a fuel economy label number. And if somebody was interested in having a segment on that, I'm not the foremost master, but I used to be into it pretty deeply, and I could give you a little bit of what goes into that and how they make those estimates. My total distance since I started, since I broke in or put in the second engine, is 5,800 miles, 5,800 miles. I've used 345 gallons of gas, and my fuel economy for that whole time is 16.8 miles per gallon. And for those who are watching from a metric country, let me say it's 9,332 kilometers distance. I've used 1,306 liters, and the fuel economy is 14 liters per 100 kilometers overall. Extended highway to me is one of the best places to get some decent data, and so I did last summer. I wanted to do another one this summer and I didn't get it in, but last summer I drove the car and I went all the way around from Michigan, all the way around Lake Michigan and back again. And the tanks on either end were kind of mixed, so I deleted those. But I have 4 tankfuls where I ran almost purely highway. I mean, there was a little bit of town driving, you know, a few miles here or there. And the speed, depending on where I was, some sections of road were 65 mile an hour speed limits, and some sections of the road were up to 75 mile an hour speed limits. So, you know, there was a broad range, and a lot of it I ran air conditioning because it was summertime, which also hurts the fuel economy some amount. But my extended trip, I went 805 miles that I measured, and my average for those 4 tanks of gas was 20.7 miles per gallon, or 11.36 liters per 100 kilometers, 11.4 liters per 100 kilometers. You know, I felt that was actually pretty good. I was pleased with that. Now, I'm going to go to the other side, which is the lowest 4 tanks. When you do EPA comparisons, they have a city mile number. Well, I don't really do an exact city number because I mean, sometimes I get into town and I do what probably would be considered that, but it's always in a mixed tank. So I went here and I'm going to show you the lowest tanks that I ever had. And in some cases, those are with a lot of stop and go, and sometimes with a lot of throttle, where I was wringing it out and doing some performance testing, or doing some spirited, having some fun driving. But my lowest tankfuls on this car were the 4 tanks were between 12.9 miles per gallon and 14 miles per gallon, which is between 16.8 and 18.2 liters per 100 kilometers. So now if I show you EPA labels, the EPA labels are kind of a funny thing. They are derived from the emission data. They don't run a special fuel economy test. They run emissions data to collect emissions certification. And you collect all the constituents that come, all the hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, everything that comes out of the tailpipe. And you run it through an equation. You know the gasoline that went in, you know what came out, and they calculate fuel economy from that. It's all done on a dynamometer. And the numbers tended in history to be optimistic. So there's what they call an unadjusted number. In 1985, then they had an adjusted number, which I don't remember the exact factors. It was on the neighborhood of a 20% reduction from the unadjusted. The city and highway numbers got a different value. So I have the numbers here from 1985 for a 5-liter twin-port automatic. It was 22 highway, 18 combined, they call it, and 16 city. When they ran those tests in 1985, in addition to making the adjustment, those tests don't run high speed. They run about 60 miles an hour as the max that the highway runs, and those were in the days when we had a national 55 mile an hour speed limit. So it kind of made sense. Later on now, so they're not measuring fuel economy at 75, for example. So the EPA has done some additional adjustments, and to match how they would measure today, they've revised. There's a revision in the label if you go into the government's website that says 20 highway, 15 city, and 17 on combined. Well, if you look at my car, including the speed rated tires, which are probably a net, I'll call it a net negative. I'm at 21 highway, about 14 city, rounding things off, and a combined of 17. So if you compare it to the current EPA label numbers, it's pretty doggone comparable, which says that that my car is probably meeting or exceeding the original certification level of this car back from 1985. The reason I bring up the tires is there are different ways that you do certification. You cannot run or certify separately every car, every option combination on every car. And so some things tend to get done by volume weighting. And so a lot of times the certification car, in this case I think you could get a Camaro Z28 tuned-port car. Instead of these 245/50s, they had I think it was a 215/65. And that was probably a higher volume tire. It wasn't speed rated like this, so it probably even had better rolling resistance, and it likely, I don't know for sure, but it likely was what they used on the certification car, and because it would have been a higher volume package. And so in any case, if you look at these numbers, I think we're pretty doggone close. The original 1985 numbers were probably optimistic. The revised label is right in the ballpark of where this car is running. And they're probably pretty close to honest numbers as to what would be achieved. So if I show that in a metric label, just for the sake of my foreign followers, you can see the highway number is about 11.2 liters per 100 kilometers, and the city is 16.8. And I've shown what the labels would look like, for a reference point. So what I would say is, I don't think the Cam hurt the fuel economy. It might have even helped on the highway. There's variability for a number of reasons between all the cars, but that kind of gets you in the ballpark of where it is. This Lunati Cam would not be does not appear that it would be a significant mileage penalty. I also should add in that the label for a manual transmission car was 1 mile per gallon lower in the city and 2 miles per gallon higher on the highway. It was 24 highway and 15 city. Go back here. Yeah, it was 24 highway, 15 city in the original numbers. And then of course there would be a new adjustment. So far, like I say, I'm pretty happy. I think it's a good combination, and I think the fuel economy is consistent with what we would have expected from this car back in the day. And I have the benefits of performance, so I think it's all good. So if you have any questions, send something back in a comment. I can always add in and answer some more of those. Have a great day.